Hello, Stuart. We're going to start, first of all, in Luxembourg, where we've got some news of a massive investigation into how companies are paying tax in that country. The 6-month-long inquiry by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists found hundreds of the world's biggest firms brokered secret but legal deals with the Luxembourgish authorities to avoid paying billions of dollars in tax. Pepsi, IKEA and JP Morgan, just some of the companies involved. With the details, here's Siobhan Silk.
It's tax avoidance on an industrial scale, and it's all legal. Through secret deals with Luxembourg authorities, hundreds of the world's biggest businesses avoided paying billions of euros in tax. Some managed to bring their effective tax rate down to less than 1%. The companies include global giants like IKEA, PepsiCo, Procter & Gamble and Heinz. They funneled hundreds of billions of euros through subsidies registered in Luxembourg, even though many have no presence in the tiny duchy. With the help of accountants at PricewaterhouseCoopers, the firms presented their own tax avoidance plans to authorities, with assurances that they would be rubber-stamped by Luxembourg's user-friendly tax office. The schemes were uncovered in a 6-month investigation by a team of 80 journalists. Reporters working with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists studied tens of thousands of pages of leaked documents. Luxembourg's finance ministry insists the arrangements don't conflict with European law, but the EU is losing patience with the country's tax regime. Antitrust regulators have already begun investigating sweetheart tax deals. It puts the newly elected president of the European Commission in an awkward position. Jean-Claude Juncker was the Prime Minister of Luxembourg when many of the deals were done.
Going to go to the markets then. What's the latest, Steve?
Well, the shares have opened down in Europe today ahead of the European Central Bank meeting later, which we'll be talking about more about in a moment. Plenty of company results, though, being digested by the markets. Two big French banks reporting today. Crédit Agricole had seen its profits rise slightly. Their shares down, though, by about 3% at the open in Paris. Société Générale, the other big bank there, they saw a big rise in their profits year on year, up around 50%. Now, that's because their bank is setting aside less money to cover legal costs in its latest set of results. Their shares, though, still down in trading in Paris. Over in Asia, we saw the Nikkei finally turn into the red after 3 days of pretty spectacular gains on the back of new monetary stimulus measures from the Bank of Japan. Just small gains, though, across the rest of the Asian markets. Now, all investors will be watching closely, as I said, as the European Central Bank meets later today. To talk about this further, we've got Naeem Aslam, who's the Chief Market Analyst at Avatrade, joining us. Thank you very much, Naeem, for coming in.
For having me.
Let's start talking, I suppose, about what Mario Draghi might do. We're not expecting much action from him, despite the fact that things aren't going very well in the eurozone. Why is that?
That is correct. He is not going to do anything because I think there's a silver lining in the data for him, and that's given a bit of a cushion. If you look at the PMI data, overall it is negative, but there is an improvement in Spain and in Italy. So number one thing is that the ECB has already done quite a lot for this year. They have done the TLTROs, and then they're doing the ABS. As you were referring before, the two French banks that I wanted to discuss at the same time, the Société Générale has produced a very good number this morning. And that's because the liquidity in the market has improved. When the ECB did the first TLTROs, the demand wasn't that strong enough. The reason was because there was an ECB stress test coming up.
These are cheap loans to banks. For anyone who's not familiar with the letters, these are the ECB providing cheap money to those banks.
Very cheap money for banks to lend, and then they can lend to consumers and households and companies to kickstart the economic growth within the eurozone. So that liquidity issue would be further addressed coming into December when there be more second injection coming by the ECB.
Now, the Federal Reserve, though, has done something very different, hasn't it? Why can't the ECB do the same?
Because it's not one monetary bank. Like, let's say that when we go back to America, there's one central bank, but in terms of ECB, there are a lot of different countries within that. So it's very difficult for ECB to do that. Yes, there is a bit of a noise in the market that they will buy sovereign debts, but then the question stands which sovereign debt they are going to buy. Is it going to be France? Is it going to be Germany? Because Draghi is getting slashes on his back when it comes to Germany. Now, according to the recent reports by Reuters, 18 governors of the national central banks are already imposing what they're saying, we don't support you. How you come up in the press conference and then say, okay, this is the plan of the ECB. So I think Draghi has a very difficult challenge in his hand when it comes to going into sovereign bonds and then doing the same kind of a quantitative easing that we had in the US.
So you're betting on December for big movement from the ECB?
Probably that would be it. But we don't think anything is going to come this year. It's going to be in next year. And then they may need to see situation getting a lot more worse before they be able to come up with a sovereign bond kind of quantitative easing. For the time being, I think today the questions would be, okay, are you going to bring the corporate bonds? Will they be buying any asset purchase? Extending that to the corporates, and what other bonds would be happening in that one, and how he is going to deal with Germany, because Germans, they don't want this thing to happen. But coming back to France, the structural reforms definitely need to happen in here. More kind of things that would happen in Ireland and in Spain.
Yeah, it's this labour market reform is the really controversial thing for the French government. I mean, they've so far resisted to do, but we've got 2.5 years left of François Hollande's mandate. We'll see if he's willing to take up that challenge. Naeem, Aslam from Avatrade, as always, thank you for coming in to speak to us. Stuart.
Thanks very much. Yeah, finally, Taylor Swift. Back in the business news.
Yeah, earlier this week we had been talking about how Taylor Swift had pulled her music from the online streaming service Spotify. We thought that was a strategy to try and help the sales of her new album. It does seem to have worked. 1989, the record is called, and it's the biggest selling album in the United States since 2002. It sold almost 1.3 million records in its first week in the US. This at a time that music sales are plummeting. Still a pretty impressive record to have beaten a 12-year sales record for Taylor Swift there. So pulling her music from Spotify, perhaps not a bad idea.
Yeah, very impressive. All right, thank you very much, Stephen. Stephen with Business here on France 24. Now, it's time for today's newspapers, and Nick Rushworth is just getting on set as we speak, as I